Good early afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to another ABS Cybersecurity webinar. I am your host, John Clark, VP of Sales and Marketing at ABS. And as we talk through today's topic, I encourage you all to ask questions in the chat or in the Q&A section. I'm going to be looking out for those and getting them answered by our two experts. I'm going to quickly throw a poll up here for you guys to give us some feedback. Does your company have a defined plan for responding to an incident? So the webinar is already being recorded. If you have to leave, don't worry about it. We're going to send everybody a link to the recording so you can catch up on what you missed. Today's topic is, how does an incident response plan
with that 5K plan that you're talking about? And we could say starting at 5K a month. That helps qualify people out without a budget.
I'm not certain what that was.
I don't know.
Apologies for the disruption there, folks.
I think we're implementing our incident response plan right now.
I believe that falls into the definition that we're going to talk about shortly. As I was saying, how an incident response plan prepares you for when your company experiences a cyber attack. I say when on purpose. More and more nowadays, it's not when, it is if. Excuse me, it's not if, it is when we have a cyber attack. And with me today, we have Wes Johnson. Wes, give a little wave for us, please. Wes is our Director of Cybersecurity at ABS. He's responsible for helping us stay on top of the security trends, and he identifies the solutions we can put in place to help combat the threats. Along with Wes, we have Tucker Oldham. Tucker, give him a wave. Tucker serves as a virtual CIO and business consultant for our customers. He's primarily focusing lately on customers who need assistance achieving their compliance goals. Incident response planning is a part of compliance goals. So he has a lot of experience helping our clients meet this goal of theirs. In a moment, we're going to talk through why you need one of these plans, and we're actually going to give you a roadmap on how to create your own. The definition of incident, I want to make sure that we're on the same page with this. It can be simplified to an unplanned, unexpected incident that stops your company from being able to do business. That could be anything from a natural disaster like a fire or a tornado or a flood. It could be a cyber attack that you experience, or if you're like ABS, it could be a week-long power outage and you are the 17th to last customer in the entire city that LG&E restores. What we want to do, and having a solid incident response plan in place, prepares us for that unexpected, right? You're going to hear from Wes and Tucker in a moment that this is a team approach. It's not just calling your IT. That team approach will help you with a coordinated handling of an incident. When you have a cyber attack, time is the most important factor. A solid IRP, as we call it, incident response plan, will position you to quickly react, contain, and mitigate that incident. Most of you should have cybersecurity insurance by now. When you have an incident, they require you to preserve the evidence. Your plan will take that into account and ensure that you're meeting the requirements and not having a surprise that maybe leads to them not covering an incident because we unintentionally did not preserve that evidence. Most importantly for you all is the business continuity. When you go through an incident, you still have to get payroll out. You still have to service your customers. Your plan should, your plan should do that under all foreseeable circumstances. And lastly, continuous improvement should be in that plan, taking lessons learned from each incident and taking that as an opportunity to get better. I'm going to let Wes and Tucker take it from here, but as a reminder, I'm going to be watching the Q&A in the chat. Keep the questions coming and I'll make sure the guys answer it. Wes, Tucker, I'm going to give it to you guys.
Thanks, John. We have a slide here about a fire drill procedure, and sometimes it kind of helps to think through the incident response plan as being very similar to either a business fire drill process or even at your home. First, you have to make sure that everybody is on board with that. They have to understand what they are preparing a threat and what is the most important things for them to worry about. Communicating the plan with everybody that's involved, setting a goal, rehearsing, practicing is a huge part of that. And then when you do practice it, you get takeaways that you can improve, that continuous improvement aspect of things. If you just sit down and write everything out into a plan and say, that's great, and stick it on the shelf, when the chaos hits, people are going to be all over the place. And by formalizing it and making it part of your culture, part of your business, you are constantly refining and ensuring that when chaos does show up, that people aren't running around with like a chicken with their heads cut off. They're actually focusing and achieving those goals that you've set for them.
Yeah, and Wes brings up a good point. When you think about these drills and procedures and things along those lines, and you put it in the context of a real world disaster versus a cyber disaster, it helps sometimes with the planning process and understanding what you're trying to accomplish. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to keep your business up and running, no matter what the incident is. So we're all familiar with ice storms, tornadoes in central Kentucky. And particularly when I think back to the windstorm we had, what was that, 10 years ago at this point, some of those big ice storms that we've had in the past. Our approach from a IT perspective was dramatically different when it came to quote unquote disaster recovery. And that's because the technology was different then. We thought about how we're saving our stuff on drives and tapes, and we had a DR test every now and again, and alerts and processes around those DR tests. And it was very, very centric to a brick and mortar business. We had our one connection in from the internet to that business, a firewall, and then all our servers on site, and all the people were on site. So we worried about how to recover that business if that brick and mortar facility was gone, and how to get those systems up and running. But today it's changed. You know, the modern approach to your data is moving to software as a service. This very much started in the email ecosystem with Microsoft and going to Office 365, and that O365 environment has slowly but surely grown, and there are lots of other applications beyond just email in that environment. But we've also started to move where our applications beyond email and Microsoft are now in the cloud. Everything from your ERP to your accounting to CRM, you name it, applications are now cloud-based. They're not behind that firewall, not on that single server, not being backed up to tape. The application providers are now responsible for the backups and things along those lines.
Yeah, and we even have clients that don't even have servers at their locations any longer. They've the Azure environments and everything else or AWS also. People have just completely and totally moved their data into a different location, a different space, and with a different, when your data, which is the thing that is most important to most companies, is put up in those kind of domains, you have to have a plan on how you're going to respond when you lose access to it.
And the access piece of it's an interesting one too, because obviously because of the pandemic, we have the ability to move remotely, and now all of a sudden I've got folks working from home, working from anywhere, and my incident response plan is simply to work from the couch. But that shifts the problem, or shifts the priority, because when you're working from the couch, you don't necessarily have all the security tools that you have when you are in the office. You're on that home internet. You don't have the firewall capabilities and some of the monitoring tools that we would normally have when we're in the office. So my incidence and the risk isn't necessarily that the building blows away. My risk is the guy working from the couch and some of the things that he potentially lets into your environment.
Well, and also further to that, when you do have a workforce that's working remotely, and you do have an incident, you think about it, something can basically take away all of your line of business tools. And then you have a communication issue with people that are all over the place that have no idea what's going on. And then who's the one that's going to be calling and updating and getting the information to your staff? We've ran into those kind of situations as well. There's an incident going on and most of the staff don't know, and they keep trying to access something they shouldn't be trying to access. So communication becomes a big part of that as well.
Yeah, and I think what we want to make sure that everybody understands through this call is that it's about what should be your priority from a risk standpoint. Again, in the past, it was whether that building was going to blow away or the power was out in that building or things along those lines. But now the risk is more about a cybersecurity threat because of all this distributed architecture everywhere. Wes, I know you were just at a conference down in Orlando talking about how these incidences are just growing and growing and growing. Why don't you talk through some of those statistics if you could?
Yeah. The scary slides.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So actually I did bring these back from the conference I was at, and unfortunately, a quick takeaway is things aren't necessarily going to get better because there's money to be made here. You can see in one of these slides, you have a 2022, and then just in the first quarter of 23, those incidences are much higher at this point, and everybody is projecting them to continue to move forward. That slide in particular on the left there is mostly just talking cybercrime in general. On the right-hand slide, I liked this one specifically because it really did illustrate how prevalent these cybercrimes are taking place. Like what the attack vector, how the bad guys are accessing clients' environments, and it's almost always through email. Everybody gets these phishing email, and they kind of will look at it as an annoyance, but really those emails could lead to a compromise. And Tucker had the slide with Microsoft Office 365. If your email is tied to your data through Office 365 and somebody compromises your mailbox, they just got your data as well. Further, we've also seen it where that's just the jumping off point. They'll get access, they will download everything in the mailboxes, and then they'll start to go after your third-party vendors. They'll go after your customers, and they're using you as a springboard to do that. So it really does, I don't want to get on a soapbox, but it really does illustrate the point that what maybe at one time was an annoyance is now becoming, the battlefield.
Yeah,
the one thing, I'm sorry, Tucker, the one thing that we did not put on this slide that kind of want to drive home is that we see these email compromises, these security vulnerabilities happening in our clients. We see it in Louisville almost every day now, Wes.
I mean, generally speaking, we usually have at least 2 of these incidents going on per week. There's some weeks where we have a higher number of them, but yeah, it's a pretty common thing, and we know how we respond to those kind of things. But the fact that they keep happening is only going to get worse, I believe.
That battlefield analogy you used, Wes, is a great one, and we're seeing the battle take place really on 2 fronts, in the sense from a business standpoint, in the sense that those threats are real and you're having to take care of them on a constant basis. But the business community is reacting to those threats as well. And at least in what I'm doing for customers, we're seeing compliance really start to be enforced much more. because of these threats. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. You know, we traditionally have seen specific industries, specific verticals that have a lot of governance around them or regulation around them. Those customers have had to meet some sort of security requirement, whether it be for government work and CMMC, whether it be banking, even PCI is probably familiar to most folks that take payment cards. Those have all had historically security frameworks that you've had to meet. First off, we're seeing those be required more and more, where audits, things along those lines, are starting to be required more than they used to be. But in addition to that, compliance is starting to apply to anybody and everybody, because John mentioned it at the start. Most everybody has a cybersecurity insurance policy. And Wes knows this for sure, that those policies have gone from just answering a quick questionnaire to now you're having to comply with what those requirements are if you are submitting a claim, things along those lines.
And one of the interesting things about this also is, these compliance frameworks, compliance is about, dotting the I's, crossing the T's, making sure that everything is mature and being audited. The cyber insurance, I don't think that they care nearly as much as they do, that they don't want to lose money, and they're tired of losing money on clients who haven't hardened their environments. So those kind of requirements that the cyber insurance is coming up with are very practical, very specific, not just in the auditing and from that side of things. So
yeah, and I think whenever I mention the word compliance, I work with a lot of folks on the compliance piece of their business, and a lot of times I end up having to be counselor as much as working through the specific compliance piece. And that's because it seems daunting, especially if I end up in one of these verticals that has that formalized governance around it. And so I'm always talking with folks about how to work through that compliance. And years ago, I found a PCI presentation that had 5 stages of compliance grief. And it's amazing that, I don't know, 15, 20 years after that original slide, it still applies. And, so when I talk to folks about compliance, it always starts with, oh, we're too small, it doesn't apply to us. And I think what Wes, John, and I can say is more and more, it doesn't matter who you are, there's some sort of compliance requirement in your environment these days, particularly if you have that cybersecurity insurance. And then it kind of rolls from too small to this is too expensive, it's unfair that I'm having to do all this stuff. And then folks say, can you just give me a piece of paper, give me what I need to pass whatever compliance requirement I have. And then it goes into kind of a depressed stage of we'll never get there. And there's just so much that we need to do to finally, to Wes's point about the cybersecurity insurance, most folks that go through these compliance processes end up where they're saying, this stuff makes sense. It's going to make my business more secure, and it helps us be more prepared. And one of the great places to start with any compliance requirement that you have is an incident response plan. It's usually foundational with any compliance requirement that you have. And so it's also fairly easy to put together. And so I want to talk about how you create those plans and give you guys some ideas on how to go.
Hey, Tuck, real quick, I'm going to share the results of our poll. Looks like we have 5 companies who do have a plan, 4 that do not, and then 1 that shoots from the hip, and they're going to figure it out as they go. So hopefully people with a plan will learn something new, and those without will get the roadmap to create their own.
And the person that admitted that they shoot from the hip, kudos to you for being honest, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about how you do create a plan. And I think the best place to start is what not to do. The first thing, and I think I've kind of hammered this home with some of the earlier slides about what we're trying to accomplish. Don't think of a disaster recovery or a incident response plan as a disaster recovery plan. This is very much not an IT plan. This is a company plan. It's not just about the technology, it's about how you as an organization react to an incident. Very important to understand that when you're putting together a good, solid incident response plan. Don't think of it as a ABS problem or your IT department problem. You're not just calling up ABS's help desk to get us to respond to an incident. There's much, much more to it. This is your plan, not your MSPs. If there are folks that aren't ABS customers on the call, don't think about it again as just your IT department as being responsible for recovery. It's an organizational responsibility.
I absolutely agree, but I will say ABS does have a standardized incident response from a technical point of view that we follow. We do that on any incident. We always assume that it's worse, and then we kind of work through it and prove ourselves wrong. But Tucker makes an excellent point. The IRP that we're talking about here is your business's IRP that sometimes is going to include things that aren't even things that we can help with. So it's definitely, we're part of it. We're part of your plan, but it's still your plan.
Very much shared responsibility. We certainly have a component to it, but we are not ultimately responsible for everything within an IRP. And that's what I want to make sure I get across to folks. Don't do it for documentation sake. Just because you have that compliance, just because you have that insurance policy, don't necessarily do it and stick it in a drawer. It should be a plan that you utilize and test and things along those lines. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, if you're spending time and money and resources on this, you should get the most out of it. And getting the most out of it makes, what I think of, and you had it earlier with the acceptance, a good plan is going to bring the business leader peace of mind. They know that there's a plan of action to follow when chaos hits. So yeah, definitely don't do it for documentation's sake, but get something for your investment.
This is one of my favorites. I think a lot of leadership, again, points to the IT department, says this is your problem, and assigns the IT person to everything in the plan. And that's just a big mistake. Again, this isn't just an IT problem. It's a company problem. We'll talk through how you build your team beyond just a single person. That's really important. So to build that team, who is that team? Who should be a part of your incident response plan? The first piece is you need to assign a incident response leader. Usually this is somebody in senior leadership. They're the strategic team leader for the incident. They're responsible for technical, operational, financial risk, ranking those risks during an incident. They again are a member of your team and are kind of that person that everything flows through when we're thinking about an incident.
But they don't have to necessarily be
decision
technical.
maker.
Yeah, they need to have a cool head, be comfortable making decisions, those hard decisions that a lot of business leaders have to, but they don't have to be the technical portion of that. That's kind of a different role.
Yeah, that's definitely not a technical role. Good point, Wes. It's more about how, again, making strategic decisions as you're working through an incident. That's important there. Having somebody on the team that is the lead as far as access and identity goes. So typically it's an administrative leader, maybe an HR leader, somebody who is responsible for onboarding, offboarding, allowing folks in and out of the network. So if I had a cybersecurity incident, first off, I want to know if the person that we think had a issue or where the breach came from. I want to know if that person really has access to those things. Somebody who's doing that on a daily basis will be able to identify and answer some of those questions. But in addition to that, there's simple things. Wes does this. He said he has a couple of these a week. The first thing that Wes probably requires is folks to reset passwords, things along those lines. So I want somebody on the team that's familiar with that process, the applications that need to be reset, and being able to communicate to your end users that they need to do certain things along those lines.
Yeah. And when it's oftentimes an HR person is kind of playing this role, and it's great that they are, because they know what personal identifiable information that they have with their employees, where it's at. And so as this develops, they can identify whether or not there's been data leaked that has to require notification.
So a compliance officer ought to be a part of the team. So if compliance is not just, there are specific ones, governance around things like HIPAA or Sarbanes-Oxley, where they require you to name a compliance officer, somebody solely responsible for meeting your compliance requirements. But don't just have it be this role isn't just about meeting a HIPAA or a SOX requirement. It's also about things like somebody who understands what your contractual obligations are to your customers for notification of an incident is a good example. So the person that is assigned as a compliance officer is simply responsible for the mandated reporting that you may have to do as a part of a compliance requirement that you have.
And if it's a smaller company that doesn't have those kind of requirements, often, I mean, you can think of this as compliance to this plan, making sure that everybody is aware of what their roles are, making sure that everybody is reviewing it on an annual basis. They're basically the flag carrier inside the organization. In some smaller organizations, it's the office manager or somebody like that that plays that kind of role, the glue that holds together the team. So it sounds really official, but at the same time, it really is kind of one of the people who are really just kind of ensuring that the plan is followed.
And along those lines, you need an internal communication lead. So the customers that are on the call that are ABS customers, this would be kind of that liaison role where our technical folks are talking with this person on a consistent basis through the incident. Who's going to be that communication lead for you, not only for ABS to talk with you, but also for you to be communicating with all your employees about things that are going on within the breach or incident that you're having. You also need to have somebody responsible for marketing and PR. So, you know, if you had a website incident, if you had a you know, information that was leaked out, you need to have somebody who's responsible for dealing with the press, for putting updates on your website about the incident, things along those lines. Really important to decide who that is before the incident.
And who it's not going to be, and to be clearly informing your staff of, you know, what to say if approached. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot to that one. You can go pretty deep there, but either way.
And finally, IT operations. So if you have an internal IT staff, obviously they need to be a part of your incident response plan. And Wes kind of mentioned this before, but understand these are the roles that you should have assigned in an incident response plan. It doesn't necessarily mean that these need to be, each one of these have an individual person. You may have somebody who's fulfilling the compliance officer role as well as the communication lead. So smaller organizations, you may have somebody doing multiple roles, but again, don't have a single person be responsible for your incident response. You do want multiple folks to be a part of the team.
A small business, people wear multiple hats, but don't put everything on one person to be a single point of failure. So, have some resiliency, some redundancy there.
Yeah, so after you've built, after you've assigned the leader, after you've built your team, that sort of thing, you then want to identify all the parties that are going to have to be involved in a response to an incident. So the first is any of your outsourced providers. Obviously, again, the customers on the call, ABS is one of these outsourced providers. But you have others that you need to document as a part of your plan. Your print vendor, for instance, maybe your critical business applications. Again, we talked about how so many of those have moved to the cloud. You ought to have written in your plan the support numbers so that you can quickly open tickets with those vendors if for some reason the data has been breached in those areas. I always ask folks that I'm building an incident response plan for their banking information. We want to quickly be able to get a hold of those folks if there's an issue with funds being transferred, things along those lines. I've done plans where I had landlords of the building because they're doing the access control or the security cameras. So we want all of that information in the plan so you're not, while you're in the heat of an incident, you're able to quickly get a hold of these types of folks. Don't think of it again as just ABS or your MSP that you're getting a hold of. You need to have your legal team documented. So this is as much of a legal plan as it is a technology plan. How am I going to respond to a criminal threat against my business? I want to have my legal team involved in some of those decisions, and we want to quickly be able to get a hold of them. And along those lines, have documented law enforcement agencies that you need to contact. So typically, I'm starting with just putting the FBI number in incident response plans, but depending on where you do business, or your compliance requirements, there may be other law enforcement entities that you need to communicate with. So you need to have all that documented as well. This one probably should be at the top but your cybersecurity insurance, what is the process for submitting a claim? What are the contact information for them? All of those you really need to have documented in your plan because not just from a response standpoint, but a recovery standpoint. Wes deals with the response and getting you up and running, and that's where his team excels. At the same time, they have to be very cognizant of making sure the data stays in place for forensic analysis, things along those lines. So we need to have that information in the plan as far as who to contact and the steps we need to go through to ensure that we don't cause a problem with you being able to file a claim as we're responding.
And, to just hit that briefly, most business leaders that I know that have cyber insurance, they have a known rep that they work with on a regular basis. But this is a great conversation of what's going to happen when I call you one day and say, we have a problem. And usually they can play it through. They can talk about whether or not they're going to provide legal support or PR support. In almost any cybersecurity incident, there's a forensics team that is going to do an investigation. So it's a good opportunity for a conversation with that person that supports you, rather than finding it out during an incident. Most of the clients that I'm working with, they just got hit and they're working through one of these incidents for the first time, and they have no idea of all of the different interactions. So that's a good one, just to reach out and have a conversation with your insurance person.
And, after you've kind of put down all the vendors that you have in the plan and thought through everybody that's going to need to be contacted, you need to kind of understand your requirements. So that number one is the insurance provider and the guidance that they're going to give you on, again, how to respond. But you also need to document who needs to be notified beyond that. So this could be your customers. If a lot of folks I know who have contracts with their customers about when they have to be notified if there's been a breach in their data. I kind of go back to the slide where we were talking about governance and folks that have a lot of compliance requirements. If you're in healthcare, you are to notify your customers within 72 hours of a breach. If you're in the financial world, you have to notify your customers within 36 hours of a breach. Each state has requirements around what notification schedules you have to make. In Kentucky, I think, Wes, you told me it's best effort is what the law says.
Yeah, the language is a
law.
little bit loose. Yeah.
And each state, so if you're doing business in multiple states, most states have different requirements there, and you need to understand that going into a breach.
And further to that, also kind of calling back to that insurance provider and notification, we have many clients who have a business email compromise, and we get lucky because we've identified it before there's any financial loss. But that doesn't mean that you didn't have an incident. We normally, with our clients, will write a report, provide it to our clients, explain it play by play what happened. And even if there was no financial loss, some insurance providers want you to give them due notice when you have an incident like that, so that they know, yes, something happened and we stopped it. What you don't want to do is not notify them if that's what their expectations are, and then later on down the road have some sort of complication, and then they are upset because you didn't notify them when the initial contact happened. So again, if there's one takeaway, it's go speak to your insurance provider and make sure you're clear about those kind of things.
Yeah, I think the other one, and we've talked quite a bit about the compliance requirements, but the other one that I don't think most folks think about is their governance requirements. So let's take a threat like if you were crypto locked and you had a ransomware and things went to pot and you had to actually pay the ransom. We hope we can recover and all those sorts of things, but there are cases where somebody's had to pay a ransom. Do you understand what the governance requirements are for your organization? Things like municipalities, schools. We work with lots of non-for-profits that have boards. You may not be able to pay those ransoms without getting approval from that board or council or whatever the case may be. So a part of your incident response plan has to have folks involved that can make those types of decisions. Do I need to get the board together very quickly to make a decision along those lines? Those are all things you need to think about as a part of your incident response plan.
And not to derail too much, but there also is, when it comes to paying ransoms, there's legal restrictions. If a country is under sanctions where that's going to go to, you legally can't pay them. And if you decide to do that without consulting your insurance team, I've heard of clients getting in hot water. I haven't helped clients in that particular situation, but again, that's why conversations ahead of time are excellent.
And then, I talked about this earlier, customers for sure. If you have contracts, master service agreements, where in those it stipulates when you have to notify them. You need to have that as a part of your incident response plan of being able to communicate with them. But one that folks don't think about often enough is your employees as well. So if for some reason their personal information was compromised in your systems, you have to notify them of that too. That ought to be a part of your incident response plan. So
You
once
also
you
need to log, I'm sorry, you also need to log that contact and log that notice.
Yeah. So once you've kind of gathered all this information that we're talking about, you're going to build your plan. And again, list out the threats, and formalize the threats and create severity levels around them is one of the things that we do when we're helping folks. I'm not going to react to a threat where there's a crypto lock of my entire environment the way I am a suspected one user compromise of their emails. So I need to be able to create a plan that formalizes the steps for those two extremes, if that makes sense. You need to communicate the plan, not just with team members, but really your entire staff about what their responsibilities are. And we talked about this earlier, define the team member responsibilities on what they've done. And once I've created all that, create a process around lessons learned. So as I have these threats come up, I want to be able to make sure that this plan evolves over time because the threats evolve and we learn every time we implement a plan about things we could have done better the next time.
Yeah. Speaking of like the evolving landscape, Tucker, you and I came across I think it was a client going for CMMC, and it was even calling out if sensitive information gets released in social media, what is your plan to get that addressed? Something that probably wasn't written into anything 5-6 years ago, but now definitely is.
Yeah, I mean, what happens if your CEO's Facebook's hacked? That's detrimental to your reputation in business, and you want to be able to respond to that very quickly. That's a good example of what Wes is talking about. That's not necessarily IT's role as far as it being on one of your internal systems, but it's just as damaging to your business. So you need to be thinking about things along those lines. So once you've implemented the plan, what do you need to do? You need to notify employees of their responsibilities. You need to notify the vendors. Each vendor that you've identified in your plan ought to be notified that they're a part of your plan. And they need to know their responsibilities. Even though we sometimes think we are, the three of us on this call are not lawyers. So we want to make sure that you're reviewing the plan with your legal team and get any insights from them on what you need to add to the plan. Real good idea to cover it with them. Again, make sure you're meeting your obligations. So contractually, compliance, all those sorts of things. You want to make sure that your IRP is addressing whatever obligations you have. And, along the theme of this not just being an IT responsibility, you need to have it signed off on by your senior leadership so that everybody understands how important it is and everybody understands their responsibilities. Once you've implemented it, once you've got it in place, you need to practice it. And I kind of talked about this before, but understand this isn't a destination, it's a journey. You're constantly updating the plan, making it better. Think about the fire drill example Wes gave at the beginning of the webinar, that it's really important to understand what worked, what didn't, and adjust.
Yeah.
You do that with an incident response plan as well.
And that's a refrain that we hit in cybersecurity all the time, which is, I can't sell you a single thing to make sure that nothing ever happens to you. It's a journey. It's a living process. It's something that we're going to do, and we're going to continually improve on it. So, yeah, that's definitely a good point to remember.
And so the way for that constant improvement is doing tabletop exercises, gather that incident response team together on a regular basis and do some exercises to make sure that you're ready, just like that fire drill. Most compliance requirements want you to do this at least annually. I've got customers that do kind of mini tabletop drills quarterly, just to keep it top of mind, that sort of thing. But establish a routine, establish when you're going to test this without an actual incident, doing it as an exercise.
Tucker, very quickly, what's an example of the exercise that you're talking about? What should they be doing in that roundtable?
Yeah, so most of the time, folks we're throwing out an incident. You've had, again, let's use the one I used earlier. The CEO's Facebook's been hacked. How do we respond to that? And each person saying what they're doing, when they're doing it, what are the next steps? You potentially have vendors involved. We've done this ourselves, where we have our customer and us on a call talking through a technical scenario. But you're throwing out a scenario of an incident and you're talking through what you would do. And hopefully through that process, you're realizing gaps in the process so that you're updating the plan as you go.
I've been part of some of these where it gets really fun, actually. Of course, we're like going through a terrible scenario, but it's almost like a game when the person running this tabletop is like, okay, and there's a pivot, and the pivot goes into, it's not just the Facebook account, his email's locked out too. And it's like, okay, how deep does this go? So yeah, those tabletops can be pretty almost like a team building experience with your leadership team.
Don't wait just for the tabletop. One of the things that I really recommend is using it for smaller incidences, just to test the plan and see how it goes. Again, we've gotten to a point where it's almost impossible to truly secure an environment from any threat. Wes has talked about how he deals with these once or twice a week. Well, use one of those minor incidences to initiate your plan and see how it works under a live scenario. A single email box that's potentially threatened might be a good way for you to see where there were gaps in your communication plan. And it'd be easier to do that with one of those types of events than the crypto locker event, where you're dusting the plan off for the first time. So, after you've gone through that testing phase, you need to update it, and you need to make sure that it's updated not just when you have an incident. That, of course, is really important. But I've got a lot of folks in that plan. I've got their numbers, email addresses, what they're responsible for. If you have any kind of change in personnel, chances are you need to update the plan when that happens. If you change third parties, so if I change out my internet provider, if I make a change in an application, I need to be thinking about updating the plan when I do that. And then, formalize an annual review no matter what, so to make sure I haven't missed any of those things. There's lots of times where you've made a change in your environment, somebody's forgotten to go back and update the IRP. Make sure you're reviewing it on an annual basis at a minimum to make sure it stays up to date.
Yeah, another thing with peace of mind, at least that it's live, it's active, everybody is somewhat familiar with it, and yeah, that's a good place to be.
So guys, I had a question, more of a statement come in. That's a good way to start wrapping this up. And folks, as I do wrap up, please throw some questions out, anything that's on your mind. Teresa says, I'm changing my earlier response, referring to the survey. I thought, in all caps, we had an appropriate IRP in place. After participating in this webinar, I see that we have work to do. And Teresa, we appreciate that validation. Our job is to educate our customers, make them aware of these things, help guide them, help them make good, solid, risk-based decisions when it comes to IT. So I'm glad we were able to help you. I hope we were able to help everyone else that's watching today. You can see on the screen, this is your roadmap to building your own incident response plan. We may have empowered you to do it on your own. We do have the fortunate experience to support over 200 clients. We see all of the things from these companies, their lessons learned that we can apply and help you create a more powerful incident response plan. So if you need help, we are here for you. Existing clients, you know how to get a hold of your technical account manager. Tucker, if you could jump to the next slide for me, sir. If you are new to ABS, I've put my contact info on the screen. You can also hit the contact us on our website. We appreciate everybody's time here today. We hope it was worth your time. We hope that you learned a lot, and we will put together more of these educational webinars in the future. Wes, Tucker, always appreciate your help in this. You guys did a tremendous job, and it doesn't look like we have any questions. Folks, one more thing. Someone asked if we could send out the slides. We don't normally do that, but since you asked, we will go ahead and send that out to everybody along with the recording. Share the recording with your leadership team. Getting buy-in in your cybersecurity, these incident response plans, that's the number one thing. Get people to buy in. Otherwise, you're just checking a box, kind of what Tucker said earlier. With that, we're going to wrap up. Thank you again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week.